Listen, just one more thing.
Hello there. Welcome to my review of episode 5 of season 3 of Columbo, published on NBC. It was written by Peter S. Fisher. Fisher was born in 1935 and wrote for 9 different episodes of Columbo. He also co-created Murder, She Wrote and worked as a writer and executive producer on that show. I couldn't find much else about Fisher other than his credits, but he's still with us at the age of 86. The episode was directed by returning director Robert Butler. The episode begins with a bomb exploding in a junkyard. We see a man in an army jacket throwing homemade bombs around the junkyard. This is Eddie Kane, played by character actor John Davis Chandler. He is soon met by another man, Riley Greenleaf, played by returning murderer Jack Cassidy. Greenleaf tries to flatter Kane, but Kane just wants to know what the plan is. Greenleaf is hiring Kane for a job, and I don't think it's babysitting. He wants Kane to shoot someone for him and gives him a gun with someone's fingerprints already on it. In exchange, he will publish Vietnam veteran Kane's DIY bomb-making book. Before he leaves, Greenleaf damages the lock of his own car. Chandler is perfectly cast as the bug-eyed, unhinged psychopath, a role he would often play because he's just so good at it. Similar to a young Peter Lorre, he oozes creepiness. We then cut to a party that evening, where Jeffrey Neal and Eileen McRae are trying to court writer Alan Mallory, played by real-life pulp novelist Mickey Spillane, to join Neal Publishing. Greenleaf arrives uninvited and apparently very drunk. He is Mallory's current publisher. He argues with the three of them and makes some pretty clear threats against them all, but particularly Mallory, before leaving and driving to a cocktail bar. While drunk driving was far more common in the 70s, Greenleaf is actually stone cold sober and setting up his perfect alibi. We then get a series of split-screen shots showing us Mallory at his office, Greenleaf being loud and obnoxious at the bar, and Kane sneaking into Mallory's building. It's a technique that mostly works very well, until Kane gets into Mallory's office and we see Kane approach Mallory from his POV and as if the camera was right in front of him. At that point it seems fairly redundant. As Kane shoots Mallory, Greenleaf makes sure to crash his car into another patron from the bar and is again obnoxious. At the crime scene, Columbo arrives and questions the security guard who found the body. A courier arrives to pick up the taped manuscript Mallory was recording, and Columbo listens. A uniformed officer comes in with the murder weapon, which was easily discovered. After finding a key and noticing the open window, Columbo has a thought, but we don't find out what it is just yet. Some cops find Greenleaf asleep in his car in the middle of a public park, and he continues to act the ass. The next morning, Greenleaf's lawyer, David Chase, played by Alan Fudge, demands Greenleaf's release. The lawyer may be named David Chase after the creator of The Sopranos, who at the time was a staff writer at Universal, at the same time as Peter S. Fisher. Columbo says he has nothing to do with the charge against Greenleaf, as he is investigating Mallory's murder.
I'm attached to homicide.
He thinks the key he found belongs to Greenleaf, which of course it does, because it was planted there on purpose, as was the gun, which also belongs to Greenleaf. Greenleaf pleads ignorance, and in an acting tour de force from Cassidy, where he is playing a murderer pretending to be innocent while trying to make himself look guilty. It's a hell of a task, and he does it perfectly.
Oh, God, no. But who? Why?
In standard whodunits, it's sometimes hard to tell if a possible suspect is pretending to be suspicious or is just a bad actor, but because we know he's responsible, it's much more enjoyable to watch. Columbo then goes to see Eileen McRae, played by Mariette Hartley. She is immediately sure Greenleaf is guilty and tells Columbo he threatened Mallory that night, but couldn't possibly have known about the book that Mallory was working on. Columbo then goes to see Greenleaf at home and notices the damage to Greenleaf's car, which is exactly what Greenleaf wants. He speaks with his lawyer and even tries to subtly convince his lawyer that he may have done it.
Well, I'm sure
David,
we could get...
would you please shut up? You don't seem to realize that Alan is dead and I may be the one who killed him.
I'd keep that opinion to myself if I were you, Riley.
When Columbo enters and explains it was Greenleaf's gun with Greenleaf's fingerprints on it, Greenleaf says he must have done it. He then talks about the contents of the book he's not supposed to know anything about, and Columbo picks him up on it, which he says he heard on the tape Columbo played to him. They go to look at his car, and just as he planned, Columbo sees Greenleaf's car has had its lock damaged. As they do this, Greenleaf gets a call from his insurance broker, which he asks Chase to deal with. Chase returns with news that Greenleaf has an ironclad alibi that he didn't even know about due to the crash that he actually engineered. He then overplays his hand by saying how grateful he is that those people called his broker. As he leaves, Columbo asks the lawyer who else was involved in the accident, and only then does his lawyer reveal that it was a couple, and with that, Columbo is on to Greenleaf. He then goes to see a locksmith before visiting Greenleaf at work, instantly making a nuisance of himself. He tells Greenleaf his alibi checks out, but now has to find out who is trying to frame him. There's then a perfectly timed moment in the elevator where Columbo says,
You know, if it hadn't been for that accident, things would have looked very bad for you now.
He then tells Greenleaf he found out about $1 million life insurance policy Greenleaf had on Mallory. His one more thing is he wonders how the killer got in the office because the key they found didn't fit the lock. Mallory had had the locks changed without Greenleaf's knowledge, so if he could find the new key, he'd have his killer. Ironically, if Mallory hadn't propped open his door, Kane wouldn't have been able to get in without breaking in, which would have disturbed the whole plan. Greenleaf calls Kane to arrange a meeting, and when he's done, he gets out some champagne and some needles and a medical bottle. He then calls a locksmith to get a key made. He goes to visit Kane and feeds him the champagne. It would seem Cassidy likes his murderers to give his victims champagne before he kills. The doctored drink then takes effect and Greenleaf goes about setting the scene, adding the new key to Kane's keychain, leaving Kane's address book open at his name, and writing himself a letter suggesting Kane had actually written Mallory's current book. He then waits to hear an explosion and drives away. The next day, Columbo meets McRae and Neil as they are having lunch, naturally ordering chili.
I'll tell you what, if you don't mind, do you have any chili?
Chili?
Yeah, with beans or without beans, either way, it doesn't make any difference.
Neil wants Mallory's manuscript released to him before Greenleaf can get his hands on it, and mentions that McRae helped with the ending, suggesting Mallory change the ending so the hero doesn't die.
After the escape, after they get back to Saigon, Rock Hudson says goodbye to the girl who helped him regain his courage, says goodbye to the material world, and goes off to a monastery.
Is that good?
If it sells, it is.
Columbo then asks if they know of anyone who would want to frame Greenleaf. He then gets a phone call about Kane, and there's some humour over the check. At the crime scene, it appears Kane blew himself up, and a sergeant has found Greenleaf's name in his address book. Columbo then finds the manuscript Greenleaf planted, and asks about a keychain. His next appointment is with Greenleaf. Greenleaf claims not to know Kane, but Columbo has a rejection letter from Greenleaf to Kane from 9 months previous for the book that Mallory was supposed to be the one writing. Greenleaf gives a fake confession about how he received an outline from Kane, but it wasn't very good, so he wanted Mallory to write it, which angered Kane. He proved this by producing the letter from Kane that he had typed the night before. All completely fictional, of course. Columbo takes the outline to McRae, who agrees it is the same one she saw from Mallory, and says it's as if Mallory dictated it himself. This gives Columbo the final piece of the puzzle, and he asks McRae to finish reading the outline. He then calls Greenleaf to meet him at Mallory's office. When he gets there, Columbo is typing. He gives Greenleaf a summary of what happened in Candidate for Crime as an idea for a story, but Greenleaf isn't interested. Columbo then goes on to explain that he found the key to Mallory's office on Kane's keyring, but that's impossible, as the lock was changed the day after the murder. Columbo had the lock changed, and Greenleaf has walked right into the trap. Greenleaf, of course, says he has no explanation as to why Kane had the key, but Columbo tells him Kane got it because the door was open. Greenleaf is angered with Columbo and goes to leave. Columbo then calls the courier, who has been giving Greenleaf copies of Mallory's book in secret. The courier, Walpert, is played by Jack Bender, who would go on to have a successful directing career, working on 40 episodes of Lost, amongst other projects. Greenleaf says that this proves nothing, but Columbo says Greenleaf has to be lying, because the manuscript that Kane supposedly wrote contains the ending McRae had just come up with just a few weeks earlier.
And for the life of me, I cannot figure out how Eddie Kane could have written an ending 9 months ago that was only invented last week.
Greenleaf is finished. This is a really tight episode from start to finish. The pacing is spot on, constantly moving towards the solution, which is possibly a little too telegraphed and simple, but still very effective. Cassidy is great at being exasperated with, but they give it their all in the scenes they're in, particularly Alan Fudge as the lawyer, who seems to genuinely care about the law. The split screens are actually quite effective in showing us 3 perspectives at once, despite slightly overstaying their welcome. Having said that, because of the relative simplicity of the story and how quick it seems to move, it's surprisingly forgettable. I think because it's a little too similar to Murder by the Book, not just because of Cassidy, but the basic plot of a writer leaving a partnership which will ruin the other, so he concocts a seemingly perfect murder, having to kill the only witness, then being caught out because the ideas he uses couldn't have come from him. It's different enough in every other way, but it is enough of a retread to feel slightly bland. For these reasons, I give the episode 4 out of 5 just after you've watched it, but a 3 out of 5 when you've completely forgotten about it 24 hours later. Make of that what you will. Thank you. Goodbye.